Okay, so in this one, I'm going to continue working in the canyon in the distance, and I've just moved across the composition. I'm all the way over on the far left, which is actually the west, and I'm going to put in the light first. I've got a lot of these canyon walls sketched in roughly, and this is going to be look like too much pigment initially, but it's going to be lightened up with quite a bit of quite a bit of water. And this concoction here I have is mixture, a little bit of alizarin and yellow ochre and a lot of water. It's probably really about all there is to it. There might be a little bit of raw sienna, and I'm as this dries, it'll get quite a bit lighter, and also I'm going to add more water to it. I am just not putting a wash over everything here because uh, it helps me to do it in this direction because it makes more sense to me as I'm working if I can actually see the highlight areas versus the shadowed. And if you just put a wash over everything, and then you have to kind of redetermine where all the shadows belong and so forth. So here, um, it's pretty general because it will be light, and I can paint over most of this. There's a little bit left to be done in the background. I want to kind of delineate some of those hills and canyons and rock faces and so forth, and make it understandable because there are areas there where it's not quite clear what's going on. If you really take a close look, yeah, it needs a little bit of delineation. Well, I'm not going to work all the way down to the bottom here. I'm just going to keep it probably about mid door level like the rest of the painting, and I'm just going to work that far, and I'll catch up again on later videos. But in the foreground, of course, I can go to a little bit bigger brush and a little bit more a sweeping action with the brush, and a little more of a wash. I've got a fairly small flat here, and I'm doing a little bit of dry brush, not a lot, but kind of dragging it in directions that the cliffs are going, and it'll leave some texture, probably not a lot, but it everything helps. And if you want texture, which I obviously do, you have to be conscious of that. So sometimes if you let those little patches dry in, they will come through your other colors that you lay on top of them and create that texture that you're looking for. So I generally am painting in the direction of the landfall. Like if it's a cliff that's vertical, I'm going up and down mostly with my brush. Uh, if it's going across that I want to see, some lines across, I'm going horizontally, or at whatever angle the fall of the cliff is. And I'm kind of going to use the color scheme that I've used on the other side of the painting, although this area here on the left is a bit closer to the viewer than what's on the right. The side on the right, to the east, goes back, I think I said like 20 miles as far as you can see. So those colors are a little more diffused, and there's more of a atmospheric perspective to it. And this one, I think the canyon is, what did I guess, 7-8 miles across, and you can see it a little more clearly. So the colors then are going to be have a little bit more pigment. Um, they're going to have a little more saturation. And of course, as you work top to bottom, the bottom of your picture plane is going to be the closest to you, and that'll contain the most pigment because it's going to be foreground. So I'm not really in the foreground here. These are still pretty distant. Um, you couldn't throw a rock and hit any of this, and it's a long way away. But I'm going to continue this light to dark approach, and ultimately I'm going to add a bunch of shadows where the canyon drops down to the river. It gets really dark, and you'll be able to see the path of that. I have already put in a really dark shadow that you can see next to the door there, and it's got a bit of a hard edge. And that's one thing that you don't want with a shadow. You don't want an edge where there is a dark line or pigment is accumulated. It's like a tide pool, and your pigment will tend to settle on the outside edge of it. So I'm going to have to soften that up, or it's not going to look natural as a shadow. Shadows don't have outlines, and you want to be very aware of that because it can really ruin the effect. If it looks as though it was, outlined with a pencil or something and then filled in, it will not work. Also, I have some lines kind of scratched into it that just are going to help to indicate that the rock formations kind of have these strata, and they're too definite at this point and will become more subdued, pushed into the shadow more, and you won't notice them too much because right now they look odd to me. There's still a little bit of the masking on the paper in it, just a couple spots, and that's going to be rubbed off, of course, and then painted over. So this color that's going in is kind of a combination. It's kind of a really light rose and yellow ochre combo. A lot of water, and I'm just putting a little bit of a tint here to the paper. Bunch of this is going to have that kind of gray green that I used previously, that indicates some brush and some greenery on the ground. It's not all sage or anything. I really don't know the particular kind of plant that it's creating that greenish. It's not a moss, but it's similar to a sage kind of color, but very gray, green gray. And the further back you go, of course, it gets even grayer and not as vibrant. But as it comes to you, I'm going to have a little more green to it. So I'll be laying that in, and some of this has to dry periodically. I use the hair dryer to accelerate that, and the process here now is just kind of working from these light tones and working next into the middle tones and then into the dark values, and finally using probably a liner brush to create some more textures in the rocks in the background. So this can be a little bit tiring to watch. So I'm going to accelerate this and add a little bit of Jim Brandt's music, and I'll pick it up again. So at this stage, I've kind of worked my way down and did a little bit of the canyon in the background, and it's a little bit tricky working around the tree because of all the needles and the the branches in the trunk. Um, the pine there, it's in the foreground, and there's a bunch of rock in the foreground as well. I've kind of on and off with using the masking uh, material on the tree, keep a little bit of texture on the trunk, but mostly I just wanted to keep the trunk from turning green or turning into the background color. And you can't just do a sweeping wash of the canyon shadow that covers the tree. So you have to work around it, and then sometimes it's best to just use a little bit of water and let the whatever fill color is there take over and get rid of the white spots, because too many of the little white specks will draw attention, and it's not going to look correct because not everything is glimmering in the light, so you don't want a bunch of little white specks for no reason. So that's kind of my approach there. Also, I wanted to mention that when you're doing something like this pine tree, I have some nice examples. I actually physically have a branch from a pine tree that's really kind of similar, but I also have some photos that I look at. And I'm not going to try to paint every individual needle on this thing. I just want to approximate the colors, keep the paper damp in the areas where I'm working, and then just for accent, use some green for the needles. Areas where they're in light, there's quite a bit of yellow in the green, and then the areas where you want a darker accent, there'll be olive green, sap green, a little bit of hooker's green at times. I usually use a touch of like burnt umber or another brown to kind of tone it down so it doesn't look like it's just something straight out of the tube. Now the trunk has kind of highlights, and it's got a lot of texture, and it's a rough bark. So the first layer on the trunk will be kind of a gold done with raw umber and yellow ochre, and use that here and there just wherever the light is going to strike. And then of course on the dark side of the trunk, which is on the left, because the light's coming from the right in this picture, on the left there'll be some dark accents in the shadows, some values that, I want complete range of values as much as possible. Also here in the canyon behind the tree needs darker values and delineation, and make some sense of these cliffs. And so I have to go back into that, but I wanted to get kind of my tree established so I knew where to apply some darks for to create more of a contrast between the tree and its background, and at least make the background continuous behind the tree so that the tree absolutely stood out on its own. And then there's really the rock in the foreground isn't all that difficult. There's just a couple of different values of kind of an earthen hue that has kind of a little bit of gold glow in the surface of the rock where the sun's hitting it, and then more raw sienna, more raw umber, and in very light amounts, just sort of a tint, because everything's very light on the ground and the rocks are very light. The shadows of the rocks, now there you can add little hints of some blues, like just a tick of Prussian or cerulean inside the shadows, and little heavier amounts of some of the combinations of browns. And I want that to be pretty wet when I get to it. So I'm kind of talking about something I haven't even begun yet, which would be the lower left here, which will be all rock and the ground color. And so it's since we're working down here in the foreground eventually in that lower left corner, the colors will be fairly saturated and a little more pigment than what I've done in the background because it's close. And we want to see those highlights and we want to see those shadows distinctly. So that's something I am planning to. I've deliberately kind of left some of the stuff in the background a little more subdued, a little washed out, with not a whole lot of strong contrast because I want to push it back. Now, the closer we come to the foreground, of course, there's more contrast, there's more detail, and the darks are darker, the values, the wider range of values. So, working in the tree here, it's kind of apply and subtract and apply and subtract. Occasionally, if I don't like what I get, one kind of little trick way to essentially erase, in quotes, would be let the paper get very dry or dry it with a hair dryer. And if you can get your brush thin enough, which I usually have to manipulate mine quite a bit to get it thin enough to do skinny little lines, I use the masking gum or the Frisket film to apply on areas like if I want to highlight on the trunk someplace that maybe got washed out, or if I want to protect an area, of course I'll use it for that. But also it's good at lifting color. So if you get too much color on something that you want to preserve as light, it's very good for lifting it. And the other way to lift, of course, is to just get a small brush and some water, put it on the area that you want to lift, and you got to let the water sit, like kind of puddle on the area and make it soak in and get very good and wet. You don't have to scrub it, you just have to puddle it up on top of the spot and then do 2 or 3 lifts. You do it once, it doesn't all pick up. You do it again, it'll get a little bit more. And after about 3, you've got everything out of it that you can. And if you want it lighter than that, you can use the masking gum, or I keep calling it by every other name but the manufacturer. I don't know why. I've just traditionally, to me, it's a gum, but anyway, I don't know what they call it on the bottle. And it's not really Frisket film because Frisket film comes in sheets. So, pardon my my poor categorization here because it's not any of those things exactly, but you know what I'm dealing with. I've showed you the bottle. I'll show it again, and it's that on the paper you see it as kind of a green gray, and then I take a rubber cement ball that's about as old as the hills, and I have kept, and I use that to pick it up off the paper, and it doesn't do too much damage. So I'm adding a little bit of accent here, trying to detail the trunk of the tree a bit more, and trying to make visual sense out of all of this. So I'll continue on the tree for a while, and then you'll see me working on the ground in the front and the big rocks, and I'll put down the first layer of color for all of that. And so I'll probably be wrapping this one up and move on to another section. I believe the next thing I'm going to be doing in this painting is the door, the grand entrance door, and all of the wood and grain that's in it. And that'll be kind of fun, I think, because the nice thing about doing nature and wood grain and things like that is it's not something that we have to have. It doesn't have to be a photographic replica of what you saw, because what's important is to convey the type of wood, the color of the wood, but the grain isn't going to make a difference to people. And it will only detract from your work if perhaps it's overdone. But in terms of the pattern of it, nobody knows. Nobody knows the pattern of the rocks. If I change some of the cliffs and the highlights and the shadows in the distance, that's not going to be something that people are going to immediately notice. I mean, unless you work at the canyon, maybe, and held this thing up to compare, because I have deviated from my photograph in places, because if I got a result that I like and it's not, photographically exactly accurate, I'm not going to mess with it. That's one thing you have to be always aware of, is at what point should you stop. And for me, it's when it feels right. And if I like something I've done, and I like what developed on the paper, and I don't want to mess it up, I stay away from it. And if later on, you look back at it and you go, well, it's not exactly what I was hoping for, then you can fool with it. But if you get something really nice in terms of color or shape or the line of it, you know, let it be and come back and see if you feel that way later. If you do, then great. So it takes a while, and these things are built up in stages. So at this point, I'm going to go speed things up, put on some music here, and next time around, we'll be working on the door and its frame. Thanks.